John, there's been discussion about private equity groups and the optics of them, or at least the companies that they own, taking government money as part of these lending programs that have sprung up from the pandemic. There are those who say that, oh, well, they're free market believers until they're not, and it's not convenient for them anymore. But is it unfair to characterize private equity groups that way, as these rich billionaires, or do they have just as much a right as Company X to get money from the government?
At what point do you want to start discriminating against owners? Private equity owns companies. You and I own companies. Most companies are getting bailed out right now, so why would you bail out a private equity company? You're not actually bailing out the private equity company, you're bailing out the companies that they've invested in. And those private equity players are actually being funded by pension funds, for example. So you could actually really argue that the pension funds are being bailed out, not the private equity funds are being bailed out. These companies that private equity owns, I think they own 35,000 companies in America, for example. They're employing a lot of people, and they do essential things. So do you really want to discriminate on them just because they're owned by one particular kind of person? I think it's fair to say we're not going to allow private equity companies to take that government assistance and pay themselves big fees. That's fair. The government did that with banks in 08, 09. So I think it's reasonable to expect that if they do get assistance, and they likely will, that they can't then go line their pockets with the government money.
So some private equity groups are pushing for this kind of government support, taxpayer support. Others are not, like a Blackstone in the US. They say they're not going to take part. But Onex, indirectly, because it now owns WestJet, is getting a wage subsidy in Canada, for example. Do you have any issue with that?
No, I don't, because once again, Onex happens to own all of WestJet. Air Canada is owned by the public, so should we discriminate against Onex because it's owned by a public company itself? It's just a different ownership structure. I don't think that that's the right way to look at it. I think the way to look at it is the government has made a decision that they want to assist the employees of WestJet to be able to make sure they can still pay their rent and their mortgages. And I think that, that's a collective societal decision. And so should we punish those employees because one company owns all of WestJet?
And so do you see it then ultimately as private equity groups having to weigh on a case-by-case basis the needs of the companies that they own versus any sort of political blowback or backlash that they might get if they do go to the government?
Yeah, I think private equity firms get a lot of blowback and a lot of criticism because they're run by some very, very rich guys who make a lot of money. And so, there's this huge, bigger debate really about the haves and the have-nots, the 1%, and then there's the 0.01%. And the private equity guys, as individuals themselves, are in that 0.0001%. And so I think it's going to have to be managed very deftly for these guys to be able to skate across the ice and not trip on a hockey stick.